Okay, thank you. Great. So let's do a recap of what we discussed yesterday. Yesterday we had started off with this case study on the camera manufacturing company model, which is into the manufacturing of cameras and also the accessories related to the cameras. So what we discussed that in case you need to create a financial model, then we kind of start with the analysis of the historical data. We look at what has been the past performance of the company in terms of net profit that it generated, and also the financial position wherein we look at the balance sheet. And after looking at the historical P&L and balance sheet, we kind of did the historical trend analysis and found out certain ratios to be able to see the trend witnessed by the company in the past. Then, as a next step, using the historical data as a trend and what has been the past performance and combining it with the management expectation about the future by going through the annual report or through other documents which are available in public domain, they can get some sense as to how the future is expected to look like. Now, what happens is when you prepare projections for a company, it is not just the company's performance that you need to look at, but you may also have to do the industry analysis and also look at how the competitors are going to behave in the future. The reason for this is that unless you understand how the competition is going to perform, you wouldn't be able to gauge your own performance in terms of grabbing the market share. So you also need to, look at the competition, the way they are going to be responding to the market environment in future. That also you also decide your own strategy and work out what kind of projections you could witness in the coming time. And once you have done that, once you've taken the base data for the future projections, then you kind of use them for creating revenue drivers, operating cost drivers, creating the capex schedule to be able to work out the fixed assets plan, and finally the funding structure, which covers your debt and equity. So this was the last sheet that we worked upon, wherein we analyzed that how the debt schedule is created and how the equity schedule is created. Wherein I discussed this concept of creating multiple schedules in the balance sheet by using the concept of four-line schedule, wherein each and every item of the balance sheet would kind of start with an opening balance, which is precisely equal to the closing balance of the last year. Then you do certain additions and have certain reductions from it. That's how we proceed and get to the closing balance of that particular item. So what we need to do now as a next step, we have to proceed and be able to see how we can create the remaining financial statement. Because if you notice in the session yesterday, we discussed about the two financial statements. One, we created the P&L, which was completed like this, and we also discussed the balance sheet, wherein all the items were created except one single line, which is basically the cash component. So what we are going to do now, we are going to be working upon the third financial statement, which is part of the financial model, and that's called the cash flow statement. And once our cash flow statement would be ready, we would use the output of that cash flow statement to be able to flow the cash balance in our balance sheet. So that's going to be our mechanism. All right. And once that's done, we proceed ahead and do the business valuation of this company by using both discounted cash flow and relative valuation. So that's going to be the agenda for today, right? So let me take a couple of questions which have been asked. So Abhijit, to your point, employee expenses have not been included in the model. In fact, they have been included, but they were kind of clubbed in certain other items. You see the operating cost, apart from the direct cost related to the raw material and the R&D and the sales and marketing cost, we also have general and administration expenses. So what happens is that any sales team cost would be covered in the sales and marketing, and all other office employees cost would be covered in GN. So you see, for a manufacturing company, the majority of the employee cost is actually towards the direct labor, right? And then the second biggest component out there is the sales and marketing. So that's kind of captured here, and whatever is balance related to the office staff covering the finance team, HR, admin, and other office-related employees, they would be in the general and administration cost, right? So the direct cost in a manufacturing company would comprise of that direct labor, which you could say that it would would need to be captured. But Abhijit, I see your point that it is going to be 60%. Probably not. It's not a standard. If I speak about a company which is into service, in that case, you would see that employee cost is going to be about 60% of the total cost. Let's say if I speak about the IT industry. Now, in IT industry, what happens is that your entire business model is driven by the employees that you have in your organization. So for a company which is having a base of say $100 million, you would find roughly about 50 to $70 million coming from the employee cost. But over there also, the majority of the cost is there in the employee cost, but then you also have certain office expenses covering the what you call as the office expenses covering the facilities cost and IT cost and the support function staff as well. So logically speaking, that this 50 to 60% is actually pretty high for those who are actually in the service industry wherein everything is driven by employees. But for a manufacturing company, you would always see that the raw material is going to be the major component, followed by the sales team and the marketing team and the R&D department. That is going to form the majority of the cost. Like if you pick the financial model or you pick the annual report of any FMCG company, you will be able to understand this fact what I'm trying to say. So if you pick the let's say the annual report of Dabur India Limited, you'll be able to figure out that in the operating cost, the cost of goods sold, the research and development, and the sales and marketing will form a very big proportion in terms of the total operating cost. So that's the major component. So depending on industry to industry, you would notice that the cost of the office employee may vary. But yeah, in the service industry, it's going to be 50-60%. I agree with you, but not in this case. Right? Now, Abhinandan, to your point that how do we basically split the cost into direct, indirect, or to be able to find out the break-even analysis. So it's not direct, indirect, it's basically fixed and variable. To be able to find out the break-even point, we need to split that in the fixed and variable component. So direct, indirect is different. Now, what we do in the fixed and how we can actually get to the break-even point. So in case you need to find out the number of units of cameras or accessories that you need to sell for breaking even at a particular level, you need to figure out that out of the total cost which is being shown here, what portion of this is fixed and what portion of this is directly driven by the number of units. If you see out here, I'm trying to compare the raw material cost with the volume. So the raw material cost in our model right now is basically the variable cost, while the other costs like R&D, sales and marketing, and G&A, we've taken these as fixed. A portion of this raw sales and marketing is also, we have connected that as a percentage of revenue. So the way we have drafted this model, that it is the values out here in the operating costs are being driven as a percentage of sales. So in case you need to work out the break-even analysis at a product level, then you need to have a product level accounting for it. And then only we'll be able to see that if 100 is my fixed cost, then to be able to cover up this part, what is this revenue per unit and what is the cost per unit at a variable level, and then we figure out the number of units to be sold for breaking even. But at this level, if you need to see at the corporate level, at the company level, then I would say that the company is kind of having a $5 million of profit. In the next year, it is having a loss of 10. So it's breaking even somewhere in between. So its sale is 700 and 650 in the next year. So somewhere in the between, it should definitely be breaking even. Right? So that's how you could work out the break-even level at the corporate level. If not at the unit level, at corporate level, you could do it. But bear in mind one thing that right now you see that it is showing losses, but the model is not yet completed. We need to create the cash flow statement, and then I'll show you. There is one more leg which is supposed to be captured here. So I'll come to that part very shortly. After completing the cash flow statement in version number 7, we'll go to version number 8 and pick that point that I'm referring to right now. Right? And then we would have a financial model complete. All right. Okay. So let us proceed now. Let's move to file number 7. And please open this, and we are going to be working upon the cash flow statement in this file. Please open file number 7. Now, to be able to create the cash flow statement, we should first of all understand that what cash flow statement tries to do. So, cash flow statement is typically prepared by a company to indicate the flow of cash in a company during a particular year. So in case you want to find out the flow of cash, be it inflow or outflow, I mean not even or inflow and outflow during a particular period, let's say a year, right? So in a particular year, I would like to find out that what has been the cash inflow and the cash outflow component so that we are able to find out the closing cash balance. The intent is to compute the closing cash balance. Because what we do over here is that we start with, if we see that I started off this year with a cash balance of 100, and during this particular year, I generated a cash inflow of X and incurred a cash outflow of Y. So on a net basis, I had a net cash inflow or a net cash outflow. And when you combine that with the opening cash balance, which was already there in the company, you will be able to see at what cash level we are closing this particular year. So that is the intent of creating a cash flow statement. You see, usually the P&L, the profit and loss account that we prepare, that's prepared with an assumption of accrual accounting. So what we mean by accrual accounting is we basically accrue a particular number, we take a particular number which relates to that particular year, no matter we have received cash or not. So that's also called as the mercantile accounting, that we are basically trying to show the picture of the performance related to that year. Whether we have received cash or not, it's a separate point. If I've done a sale of 100 rupees in one particular year, I would take that in one particular year to which it relates, in which it was done. So if there was a customer who came to me and purchased goods worth rupees 100, and I'm going to book 100 rupees of revenue in my P&L. But let us say the entire year has passed, and out of that 100, that particular customer has paid only 80 rupees to me. So the balance 20, which is still outstanding, that will be reflected in my balance sheet, but I wouldn't reduce it from my P&L. It would still be 100 of the total sales, not as 80, which is the cash component. So that's the basic difference between P&L and cash flow. That cash flow only and only talks about the cash position, right? Whatever cash transactions have happened in one particular year, we would try and figure that out in the cash flow statement. But the P&L talks about the period into which that particular item pertains to. Meaning, if the sale is done in the current year, I'll do that. I'll take that in this particular year. Similarly, if I've spent something which relates to the current year, I would show it here no matter if I paid cash for it. But cash flow statement on the other side is pure cash, right? So that's the main difference between the P&L and cash flow statement, and that is the precise reason why your net profit does not indicate the cash position. So if you have generated a net profit of say $5 million in one particular year, doesn't mean that your cash will increase by $5 million. $5 million is only a nominal number for us, that which indicates that in this current year we have generated a profit which is $5 million. But what is the amount of cash that I've generated in this year? I don't know. I would need to look at that by considering the cash flow statement. So that's how you basically read the P&L and cash flow statement together. So what happens is when you create the cash flow statement, in the cash flow statement, you basically have three items under which you categorize all of the transactions. So one, you would have cash flow from operating activities. Two, you would have cash flow from investing activities. And three, you would have cash flow from financing activities. So what's the difference between these three, and how do we basically categorize the transactions under each one of these heads? So as you can see, the first part talks about the operations. So basically this covers the cash from the core operations of the company. The real work that the company is doing, that gets reflected over here. So whatever is related to the normal operations of the company will be parked in this particular, right? So this is the activities related to day-to-day operations or the regular operations of the company that will be captured. In the investing activities, we typically speak about the capex, which is basically any purchase of fixed assets that we have done for enabling the operations of the company. So, if I have to do certain operations, I need a machine to be purchased for it. That particular purchase of machine is going to be captured in the investing activities, right? Then comes the financing part, wherein we talk about that if I need some cash, how am I going to arrange the funds for it? So here we cover the debt being raised or repaid and equity being raised or any payment being done to the equity shareholder. So anything which talks about the funding part will be captured in the financing activities. So here you see that you arrange for funds out here, you use it to purchase fixed assets, then you use the fixed assets to do your regular operations. Then the cycle repeats again that because you're doing operations, you're generating cash, you would use that cash to be able to repay it and give dividend to your equity shareholders. So that's how the cycle works. So you begin with the fundraising part, you use it for the investing purpose so that you can do your business, and then the regular operations would fuel the cycle. And then you can keep on going back to the funding providers or the fund providers and keep the money or give the money back. So that's how the typical cash cycle would work in the organization, right? Now there are a couple of things that we need to understand. So financing definitely covers the debt being raised, debt being repaid, interest expense being paid, and all that stuff related to the debt part. And on the equity side, they will have the equity raised, the dividend payment, and all that stuff. Under the investing activities, we typically see the capex, which is basically the purchase of fixed assets, which is the core investment. I would say this is categorized as the core investment. But you could also have something called as non-core investment. Now, what is the non-core investment that I'm referring to? The non-core investment is basically any investment that a company is doing which does not relate to the regular operations of the company. Like if you're purchasing a machine, that's a core investment because that machine has been purchased so that you can manufacture the cameras and sell off those cameras to your clients, to your customers. But let us say there is this company, let's talk about again Dabur India Limited, which is an FMCG company. It has got $100 million of cash, which is just lying idle in the bank account, and it doesn't need any additional machinery or something to be purchased for manufacturing its core products. So what it decides that the extra cash that I've got in the company, let me use that cash for purchasing shares of the Reliance Industries Limited. So Dabur India Limited decides to use its excess cash for the purpose of buying shares of Reliance Industries Limited. Now, those shares that Dabur is purchasing is basically that has got nothing to do with the regular operations that it does, right? That is why we call it as non-core investment, right? And any income that we generate out of it, it's more like an investment income. That is also a non-core or a non-operating income. So any income that we generate, let's say in the form of dividend that I've received from the so Reliance Industries Limited has declared a dividend, and I also hold good number of shares, so I'm receiving that dividend income. So that dividend income is also an investment income, which is going to be categorized as a non-operating income in our P&L, right? So this is how you would see that you would have the core investment, which covers the regular activities of the company, and non-core investments, which covers the other activities apart from the regular one. All right. So let me read a couple of questions before I move on. Abhinandan, I just noticed your question. Yes, you're right. Fixed is indirect, variable is direct. Indian companies. So Anand, to your point, it's not just relevant for Indian companies, but in fact, for that matter, any manufacturing company would have various components under the cost of goods sold. So we'll have the direct material, which is basically the raw material being used. We would have the direct labor, which is basically the factory labor who is actually working on the ground for manufacturing those goods. And then we have certain direct expenses which relate to the factory expenses part. So if you look at the annual report, you would see that in the financial statement, the cost of sales is typically combined. So If you're able to get the result, if you're working in the company, you're able to bifurcate between these three items, you can model at that level. So, see, the point is in a financial model, there is no denying to a fact that you can take a deep dive and split a number into multiple line items and then prepare a schedule for it. You can always do that. But it is always a game between the availability of the information with you. If you do not have any information, then how would you be able to project that particular item? So definitely you need to have access to that information, only then you can proceed and create a schedule for it. So Amanpreet, to your point, earning from investment of excess cash will be non-core. Definitely yes. So if any asset which is used for other than its business activity is going to be non-core. So the point is that if there is an asset, it's more like an investment that it is done, and it is not being used for the core business operations of the company, and it is going to be categorized as a non-core investment. Right. So sometimes they would see that there is this extra income that we generate, which is on account of the purchase of mutual funds, purchase of shares. If it is kept for a longer term, obviously it's an investing activity. Otherwise, sometimes the treasury department keeps on churning out the cash on a short term basis. That's a separate part. But look at non-core investment as a fact that it's being done for a long term basis. That's why it's a non-core investment. So in the cash flow statement, if there is a purchase of land, building, office, etc., that I would categorize as core investment, because you're purchasing that building for having a factory or for having an office, which is directly going to support your business operation. So it is a part of your core investment. So Dipankar, to your point, if you're hedging your operating risk through the investments, will that be considered here? See, hedging is a different point altogether. So what happens is that the company can take a hedge for the uh, excuse Okay, so coming to your point, Dipankar, if there is a company which is taking a hedge, now we need to see that for what particular component the company is taking a hedge. Do not confuse the hedge with an investing activity, right? So investing activity is more to do with an investment. Hedge is more like a transaction that we are doing. If it is for an operating activity, say I'm going to, I have to pay to a creditor in the US dollar and I'm an Indian company. So I have to do that, make that payment in 3 months' time. So after 3 months, I don't know where the exchange rate is going to move. So I'm going to hedge the currency risk as of now. So that's going to be covered as part of my operating activity. So that's how we figure out that what particular activity it relates to, and then we club it accordingly. Right? Okay. So any dividend income, where will it be classified in the cash flow statement? So I would say that this dividend income, see, at the same time, I would like to highlight one more fact, that whenever you create the financial statements for the purpose of financial model, then whether you take a particular activity in which, so in whatever activity you're going to take this head, it actually is relevant only from a perspective of the presentation, right? So if I don't, split my cash flow statement into these three heads and I simply club everything together, even that is going to give me the same result that I typically get by showing it under various heads. So the intent of having these three heads is because each and every accounting standard related to the country that you for which you create that financial statement, you would see that the accounting standards would specify how to present that data. Now, if I speak about, let's say, the Indian accounting standards, so the Indian accounting standards would specify that this is how you do it. In the point number one, operating activities, these are the activities that you need to be showing. In the investing activities, these are the pointers that you need to cover, and so is the case for the financing activities. So it specifies that in case you're using a direct method for the cash flow from operating activities, then you also have to show an indirect method. So these are specified in the accounting standard. So if you are going to create a cash flow statement from a presentation perspective, right, for to align with the accounting requirement, then my recommendation is that you read the accounting standards of that particular country and then accordingly prepare the presentational aspect of it, right? So right now, from a financial model standpoint that we are discussing, to be honest, it does not really matter where at which particular head you're going to show, or if you're going to club everything together in the cash flow statement, I'm good with that as well. Because what is the intent of creating financial model? Let's understand that part. I'm not denying this fact that splitting it in these heads is actually a good way to present it. Definitely, it is a good way. But the point is that is the intent. The intent is to be able to see what is the net cash flow during a year. And then we see that what is the opening balance of cash to be able to work out the closing cash balance. And this is going to be used in my financial model. Because this item that I've shown here, this particular part, is basically going to be used in our balance sheet. This is needed in balance sheet. This goes to balance sheet. So it is more like one of the schedules that I typically work upon in the financial models. Right? I hope this makes sense. Any questions till this stage? Otherwise, we can move on. Uh, okay. Any questions, doubts till this stage? Okay, fair enough. Let us move ahead then. Let's go to the cash flow statement and see how we can create it. Now, I'll come to the operations part a little later. Let us first talk about the financing activities, then we'll go to investing, and finally, we'll move to the operating activities part. Now, financing is the simplest head because here we have all the activities related to debt and equity. So if there is any equity that has been raised, you will cover it here. Any loan that has been taken, any loan that has been repaid, you will take that, and all the related stuff is going to be captured here. So whatever is related to your debt and equity will be captured out here, right? So what do we do? Let's begin with the equity being raised. Now, if you see, we kind of use this equity being raised in the other calc sheet. Let's go to other calc and bring this equity raised from the row number 6 over here. So let me show you the formula here. See, just have a look at this point that I'm trying to display the I'm trying to create this cash flow statement from the year 2017 onwards, right? So I'm not going to prepare it for 16 here. So if you want, we can do that for 16 as well. There is no problem. But why I'm showing it to you, in fact, I wanted to create the cash flow statement only for 19 to 23. It is just that we have got 2 more years on the left hand side, so we're going to use it. Otherwise, in the financial model, I'm more interested to look at how the future looks like because the historical cash flow statement is already available with us in the annual report in the historical financial statements. We can very well bring that from the historical data as well, right? But if you are doing that, just be aware of the column that you need to refer to. And in fact, one of the best practices of the financial model that I would like to highlight here is basically the column consistency. And I can now speak about it because we've almost completed all the statements in the financial model. So what we mean by column consistency is if I take you back to the P&L, have a look at this. In the year, so the year 2019 is in the column H. In the balance sheet, you notice the same 2019 is in the same column H. And in the cash flow statement as well, the column H includes 2019, which means that to the extent possible in the financial model, all the worksheets need to have a consistent column for the same years. So if I'm using column H in this particular sheet for 2019, I should try to make sure that in all of the worksheets which are there in my financial model, I should dedicate column H for this particular column. Because what happens is that many a times when you create a formula, you write something, you refer to some other sheet, it acts quick check for us. And if I'm writing a formula in the column F and I'm referring to the other calc sheet, again taking the data from column F, most likely it will be correct because I'm referring to the correct year. In some cases, there could be a deliberate attempt to go to a separate cell that's a different part, but usually you would notice that this kind of situation will you if it's the same column reference will help you to verify your to verify your formula, if you're referring to the right year or not, right? So let's go to the next part, that is secured loan raised. Any amount of loan that we have raised. So we've kind of split that in two different lines, secured loan and unsecured loan. So you would read that this company doesn't have anything in the secured loan. Still, I'm going to pick this data from row number 16 over here, which captures the secured loan component. Let's put that here. And if I take you back to the row number 16 in the debt schedule, this is what I'm referring to. This row number 16 covers the new issued under the secured loan category, and this new issued is available in row number 6 over here. So you could do that, refer to this, and call it from row number 6 over here. Now, Prachi, to your point, you can definitely prepare it for 2006 as well. There is no problem with that. You can prepare it for 2016, which is our first year as well. Usually what happens is that sometimes people don't prepare it for the historical period. So in fact, I wouldn't even want to create the cash flow statement for 17, 18 also. But whatever we are doing here for 17, we can do that for 16 as well. So please feel free to begin your cash flow statement with 2016. You can do that. There is no problem, right? So we've got the equity raised, secured loan raised, and the unsecured loan raised. And from the same debt schedule, we also have the loan repayment part. There is nothing in the secured loan repayment, but there is something in the unsecured loan payment. So you need to be aware of one thing, that right now I don't have anything in the secured loan category. Still, I would need to refer to it in the cash flow statement, because at a later stage, if somebody is going to do something in the assumptions tab which makes the changes in the debt schedule, then automatically it should be reflected in the cash flow statement as well, and also the other sheets as well. So right now I don't see anything in the secured loan being raised or repaid. Still, I'm going to show that formula over here. But just be aware of an additional part, that in the cash flow statement, the sign of the number is very, very important, because the positive number indicates that it's a cash inflow, and a negative number would simply indicate it's a cash outflow. Like any repayment is a mode of a cash payment. So please put a minus when you bring the data from the debt schedule to bring the repayment part. So I'm going to bring the data from row number 17 for the secured loan and row number 7 for the unsecured loan. So please put that formula appropriately by giving a minus sign in the beginning. Now secured loan is blank, so it doesn't make a difference, but look at this. When I pull this data from here and I put this minus sign, you see I put a minus sign over here in these two cells just to make sure that these numbers are negative. These numbers should be shown as a negative figure to be able to indicate that it's a cash payment, because when we repay a loan, it's a cash outflow. So that's why it needs to be shown as a negative item. So what I'm trying to say over here is that we might commit a mistake if it is zero. Like in the secured loan, it is zero. We don't really get to see if it is actually correct or not. But as I said, if in case somebody is going to put in assumption that secured loan is being raised and repaid, then that should be reflected properly in the cash flow statement. So just be aware of the minus sign as well when you put this data over here. Right? So this covers the debt component. Then comes the equity part. Now on the equity, what is the return that we are giving to the shareholders? It's basically a dividend payment. So I'm going to put a minus. In the other calc sheet, we've got a dividend payment here in row number 12. So we'll pull it from there in the other calc sheet. So let me show you. When we were creating this retained earnings schedule, we had covered this dividend payment, which is zero in our example, but that's fine. Whatever it would be at a later stage, somebody is going to make changes in the assumptions tab. It will flow first to the other calc sheet, and then eventually it will flow to the cash flow statement. So that is the return to equity shareholders, right? And the last number here, after which I'll take a pause for you to complete in your machines. So the last one here is the interest expense that we are paying. So I'll take a minus. I can take it from the debt schedule. We have taken the interest expense over here, and we can also go to the P&L. Like in this sheet, I've got the interest expense starting from column H, which is 19. So I don't have 17 and 18 here. So I can also go to the P&L and fetch the interest expense from row number 19. So when you take this, it's going to pull that number over here, which is interest expense for this particular company on the debt. So the total of this is going to give you the total cash flow from financing activities, right? All of these items, if you notice, but to debt and equity components. A minute, have a look at it, try your hands in the machines and in your machines, and then please complete this cash flow from financing activities. Should you have any questions in the meanwhile, please feel free to put that on chat. Abhinandan, here, if you see the way we created the financial model, we aren't really making a difference between the accrued part and the payment part on the interest, because I don't know what is the frequency in which the interest is being paid and what is the frequency at which it needs to be accrued. So accrual is simple, that if it is 12 months period, whatever relates to that year, I'll take that to P&L. But for the payment part, we need to be aware of what is written in the debt agreement. And right now, we don't have that kind of information. So usually you would see that in the absence of that information, the best option is that assume that whatever is accrued, we are going to pay in the same period. So that's why I'm taking it same. So directly you could pull it from out here. That's fine. There's another question just come up from so Prachi. If I see that you're getting 0 in the brackets for negative, and you're getting minus sign. Okay, so it's more on the present. Oh, fair enough. So Prachi, to your point, it's more to do with the number formatting. So what happens is that this number, if I put, let's say I put it in this cell, I put minus 30, right? It can be this minus 30 can be shown like this, or it can be shown within a bracket. So how you can change the display format of these numbers? You could basically go to the home tab, and then there is this number. Click on this number formatting, wherein you have a category called number. Here you see on the right hand side, we've got all of these formats. So do you need a decimal place? No, I don't. And negative numbers you want to show as a minus in the red color, or in the bracket, or with a red color bracket. So whatever options you would like to pick, you select it from here and then press OK, and it will display the data in that particular format. So the catch is to be able to make such changes, go to the home tab, click on this number, and then it will display the result for you. Right? So this is how you can change the number formatting. Now the other part, how to capture the data in the lakhs and millions. There is a format, custom format that we can use to align to it. So you could use a comma style. The default in your case, if it is the lakhs, then it would display the lakh separator. But like in my machines, I've got a million separator. So there is a way to switch between this by applying the custom formatting. So you could apply that over there. And if I show you, it's definitely out here. So in the home tab itself, you can give it a try. In the home tab, we have this number, and please explore it. So your point is you're not getting this option in the numbers. So when you go to the numbers, you're not getting this option. If you are not getting this option, what you could do, you could go to the custom tab and put this over here. So the custom formatting for this is going to be 0. Let's say we put hash comma hash hash 0, and then a semicolon, and then in the brackets you put hash comma hash hash 0. This is what you could put for in the custom formatting. So let me just put that in the chat window so you can copy from there. You can put that in the custom formatting. Put this in custom formatting. This will display the data, negative data in the brackets. So if it is not visible by default, so what you have to do, you have to go to home and click on this number formatting. And over here, you have the custom section. On the right hand side, you have a type in custom, and there you need to put this hash comma hash hash 0, and then a colon, and then hash comma hash hash 0 in the brackets. So how it works is the first place is typically for positive numbers and the second place is reserved for negative numbers. The hash comma hash hash 0 is basically a formatting type. You may not need to put 0, you can just put hash comma hash hash hash. That also is going to give you the same result. So you can put hash comma triple hash, because this hash comma triple hash or hash comma hash hash 0 is an indication that you're trying to show the data with a thousand separator. Otherwise, it would be as simple as this. You would put 0 and then you would put 0 in the brackets. If you don't need a thousand separator, you can put it like this. But if you need a thousand separator, then we need to put a hash comma double hash before the 0 so that it can put that thousand separator wherever applicable. Right? So this is how it works, Prachi. I hope this is. Okay, so Rohan, I see your question that if all the figures, and in fact, it's a good question. Let me explain it to everybody for everybody's benefit. The question is that in the balance sheet, I've already got all the figures related to the to assets and liabilities and equity. Only one item is missing, and that is cash, right? Only the cash balance is missing over there. So if there is just one item missing, then why can't we take it as a balancing figure? Why do we need a detailed cash flow statement to be able to work out the cash and then flow it there? The answer to this is basically there are two reasons for it. Reason number one, when you create a cash flow statement, you're basically able to understand how you started with a net profit of say a $5 million in this year and why your cash is some other number. So that kind of reconciliation is provided in the cash flow statement, right? That's reason number one. Reason number two is, let us say you have, while working on the financial model, by mistake you committed some error. So you missed on some part and you committed that error. So you would never be able to find out if there is an error in the model if you're putting cash as a balancing figure. But if you compare cash by creating a cash flow statement, then you flow to the balance sheet and you notice that there is this check at the end which covers the balance sheet check, making the two sides of balance sheet equal. If at that point in time you see that there is a false, it's an indication that we've done something wrong. So we'll be able to validate the model if you have accounted for the items properly or not, which would not be possible if you're putting cash as a balancing figure, because putting cash as a balancing figure means you're making two sides equal manually, no matter if there is a problem in the model, but we would never be able to identify that. So for these two reasons, it is important that we create a cash flow statement and figure out the cash from it. Right? I hope this makes sense, Rohan. All right. I hope all of you are done. Let's move to the investing part now. So in the investing activities, we have to cover the capital expenditure, which is basically purchase to fixed assets, and also cover anything else related to the fixed assets part. Right. So please move to investing activities, and all of those data points we would get from the asset schedule. If not available there, then definitely from the balance. So okay, Prachi, you're asking me to repeat the last part. So can you please explain what is this last part? Are you talking about the investing activity or you're referring to the importance of the cash flow statement? Okay, importance of cash flow statement. See, the thing is why we are creating the cash flow statement. There are two reasons for it. Reason number one, cash flow statement explains that how our cash has moved in a particular year, which is not reflected in the P&L. So if you have generated some profit, then the P&L doesn't explain the how a particular cash has been generated in a particular period. So this statement explains that fact. That's point number one. And point number two is the cash flow statement helps you to identify if there is an error in the financial model. Because what we are going to do, the output of this cash flow statement, which is the cash position, we're going to flow in the balance sheet. If you see, if you go back to the balance sheet, you would notice the cash balance is missing. So the moment I flow the cash number from the CFS to the balance sheet, I'll be able to see if the balance sheet is matching or not. If you figure out that the balance sheet does not match, if the balance sheet does not match, it's an indication there is an error. So if you put cash in the balance sheet straight away as a balancing figure, then we wouldn't be able to identify if we have committed an error or not. If I have committed some error and now that error would be lost because I'm putting everything as a balancing figure in the cash. So that's how we basically lose on the opportunity to identify any errors that we may have committed while creating the financial model. That is why we don't put the cash as a balancing figure. Right? So that was the reason for creating the cash flow statement. All right, I hope this explains the point. Let's come to the investing activities now. Cash flow from investing activities. Now, it would cover the fixed assets component like the capex and any amount of fixed assets that we have sold off in a particular year. Like capex that we do, capital expenditure, it's an expense, cash outflow, put a minus. Go to the asset schedule and pick the capex from there. So we've got the capex in the row number 8, so pull it from there. You can pull it from there. If I show you the asset schedule again, and let me zoom that out a little bit. So we have got the capex in row number 8, and similarly the disposal is available in row number 6. Same fact as I discussed before. Disposal is 0, but don't worry about that. Put the formula at least. That capex is given. We are taking that and putting a minus out here because capex is more like an expense. So we would need to put the minus in front of all of these numbers so that we can reflect it as a cash outflow. Second, disposal of assets. As I said, it's going to be positive figure. So take it from row number 6, disposal of assets. So these two things that you see out here pertain to the fixed assets part. The first two line items are the fixed assets component. Okay. And last but not the least is the capital work in progress. Now, I don't see anything in the work in progress line now, but still, whatever work in progress you would have in the capital assets, you would need to show that here as well. Can I just request everyone to please keep yourself on mute? Someone who is on unmute mode right now. I see there is this participant, Tabharek. Tabharec. Can I just request you to please keep yourself on mute? Can I request you, Tabarek, to keep yourself on mute? Thank you. All right, let's come back here. So I was talking about the capital work in progress. Now let us take an example to understand this fact. Let's say in one particular year, say I'm taking 2020 and 2021. And here I have the capital work in progress, right? Let us assume in the 2020, I had a capital work in progress of 100. And in 2021, I have additionally put in $20 million on the capital work in progress. So it becomes 120. So the question is that this increase in the CWIP that you see in the balance sheet, what does it indicate? This increase indicates that we have spent that much amount on the work on the capital asset part. So that increase in CWIP, capital work in progress, is 120 minus 100. But this increase from a cash flow standpoint will be negative. So I would need to put a minus sign in the beginning of this number so that I can show that increase as a cash outflow. So what you need to do when writing a formula for an increase in CWIP, you will need to write, from a cash flow standpoint, you will need to write equal to minus the current year number minus previous year balance sheet number. This is what we need to do from a cash flow standpoint. That you pick the current year balance sheet number as 120, subtract 100, which is the previous year balance sheet number, and that delta put a minus in front of it. So that indicates that $20 million is the additional cash that we've spent on capital work in progress during this particular year. So let's come back to this, and I'll copy this formula out here. I'll copy this logic in fact out here, and then we would write a formula accordingly. It's going to be minus of current year balance sheet figures it from the balance sheet minus the previous year number from E39. So we've got it in F39 minus E39. That shows us the increase in CWIP. See, over here, we would definitely be tempted to ignore this line. The reason is that we don't have anything in balance sheet, so why would I even write a formula out here in the cash flow statement? It's not there in the balance sheet. So what would I do if I write this kind of a formula in the balance sheet? Why do I even need to pick this logic that put a minus sign, take the delta and then have it here? The reason for this is no matter it is zero or not, if there is a line item in the balance sheet, it needs to be called in the cash flow statement and put the formula appropriately. For the same reason that I've been saying again and again, that if the end user is going to put some inputs for this line, then the balance sheet would get updated and automatically it should reflect the impact on the cash flow statement. So please be aware of all of those facts. Right now, we may not be able to identify this error. This is actually a potential error. If I put a minus or I ignore the minus or I don't write a formula at all, right now it won't make a difference because all of these are zero. But if the user is going to provide an input at a later stage, then definitely it is a case of a potential error. We need to handle it appropriately because here we don't even have a numeric value to find out if it is making sense or not. Because if we have numbers, we can still make out some sense. Okay, 10 is the repayment component, 20 is the interest that we are paying. So we can make some sense out of it. But making sense out of zero value is not possible. So obviously over there, the formula becomes very critical. Right? So the total cash flow from investing activity is, right? Take a minute, finish it off, and then we'll move on to the operating activities part. In the meanwhile, if you've got any questions, please let me know. So this completes the cash flow from financing activities and the cash flow from investing activities. I hope all of you are done till this stage. For any questions, please let me know. And then we'll move on to the last part of the sheet, which is cash flow from operating activities. All right, I think we can move on then. Let's move on to the cash flow from operating activities. What we do over here in the operating activity is pretty interesting because that's where the core of the cash flow statement lies. Because this indicates what is the real cash that we have generated from the main operations being done by this company. So if I'm doing some business, I'm generating sale, I'm incurring expenses, what is the net cash that I'm generating? That gets reflected in this particular block. So we need to understand this part, that how this is created. It is created in an indirect manner. That's why it is also called as an indirect method. Why indirect? Because we don't compute the cash flow from operating activities directly, because that requires us access to the transactional level data, which may not be possible because there are too many transactions which are available in a company. That's point number one. And point number two, then if we prepare it as a direct method by covering the direct transaction, we may not be able to correlate the cash position with the net profit that we see in the period. So if you need to create that kind of reconciliation between the net profit after tax from P&L versus the cash that you have actually generated, you need to follow this kind of a method which is being shown on the screen, and that's technically called indirect method of cash flow statement. We're going to follow the indirect method. What this method says is that you start with the net profit which is there in the P&L. So let us just pull the values of the net profit from P&L. That's our starting point, right? So this indicates that this is what we have kind of generated in terms of net profit after tax in each of these years. And what we do, we kind of make adjustment for all non-cash items, all non-cash expenses, and anything which is not operating in nature. So what are the non-cash expenses? Like depreciation is a non-cash expense. It's more of a charge, because what is the cash component? The cash component is the capital expenditure, which is reflected in investing activities. So what you see in the depreciation line is just a charge that you are taking to P&L. So because we are starting with the net profit, we'll go back to the P&L and identify that are there any items in the P&L which are non-cash in nature, right? So if those are non-cash, then I've actually artificially reduced my net profit, because from a cash flow standpoint, I haven't really spent that amount. So I shouldn't be deducting that depreciation component. So I'm going to be taking it again and add it back out here. So we would be able to see it from the P&L. Depreciation line is given here in row number 17. So add it back over here. Dipankar, we could have straight away used the EBITDA line as well, but the thing is that the tax component also needs to be paid. So if you begin with the EBITDA line, then the tax component would need to be adjusted out here. So you feel free to do that with respect to the EBITDA as well. But then bear in mind that you have to make an adjustment for the tax, and any other item which is non-operating in nature is also there, or something which needs some attention, that also would need to be adjusted. So the safest and the most common way from a presentation standpoint is that you begin with the final value, which is your net profit, and then keep on adding or subtracting whatever is supposed to be adjusted, right? So Vishaki, to your point regarding the ESOP, so ESOP is basically the issuance of shares. So if any shares are being issued to the employees, sometimes what happens is it is given free of cost. Sometimes you give them an option to buy the shares of the company at a certain price. So if the real worth of that share is 100, and I'm giving an option to buy the shares of my company at 70, then 30 rupees is the benefit that I'm going to offer. So that's an expense that we book in our P&L, and that's going to be shown in the P&L as well. So obviously it's an expense for the company, so that needs to be captured. But sometimes, when you receive that cash, as I said, 70 rupees is the cash that you're receiving from the shareholders, from the employees who are going to buy those shares. That 70 rupees is not an income which you will take in P&L. What we take in P&L is basically, as part of the ESOP accounting, the corresponding expense which the company is incurring. Because the worth of the share is 100, you're giving it for 70. So 30 rupees is the expense that you incur as part of your employee cost. So you would take that in your P&L. However, it's more like a notional cost for you, which you are booking in the P&L. It is non-cash, and that tends to be adjusted out here, and you add back that non-cash expense in the cash flow statement. Does that make sense? Perfect. So let's proceed then. Now comes the next part, which is interest expense. Now, interest expense, I wouldn't say it is non-cash, but definitely it is not an operating activity. It is the it is a financing activity. So I've already subtracted the interest expense in the financing activities part. So yeah, Pratmesh, you're right. And the other comment also I've seen that it is not just the non-cash, but also the non-operating criteria. So the non-operating, like I'm just talking about the interest expense. So it is the non-operating part. So the non-operating part over here is the interest expense, which is basically the financing activity. So I subtracted it there in the row number 33. That's interest expense. So I'm going to add it back over here because I need not subtract it from the net profit, which I've already subtracted. So I'm going to add it back and I'll take it from P&L and put it back out here from row number 19. So you see that this row number 19 is being added here and it's being subtracted here in the financing activities because the right presentation for this line is basically under the financing activities. So that's how we handle it over here. So I think Pratmesh, your point is answered. I think you were also referring to the ESOP part. So whatever additional expense that the company is incurring, definitely it's part of an employee cost. It is taken in P&L, but it is non-cash in nature, so it is added back in the cash flow statement. And Meher, to your point, yes, it is basically an offsetting part. I would put it that way. So dual effect or dual impact, you could put it that way as well. But it's more like offsetting in nature and reclassing it between the right blocks. So it is not operating; it is actually financing. So I'm just adding it back here and subtracting it there. But at the end of the day, when you combine everything together, then it's going to get nullified. All right. Okay. So let's proceed then. Now, the next is basically the changes in working capital. Now, this is very interesting. Let's take an example to understand this part. So, similar to the capital work in progress, let us assume you have the debtors balance. Say it was 100 and it is increased to 120. What is happening? That the debtor balance goes up when you have done some sale, but that sale has not led to increase in cash. And when would that happen? When the sale is non-cash. So if there is, let us assume there is this 20 rupees of sale which you have done in this particular year for which you haven't received any cash. It is credit. And that's why that credit component is going to get reflected in the debtor balance because that means you have to receive that amount from your customer and it is being shown in the debtors line. So any increase in the accounts receivables or what you call as your customers or the debtor balance is an indication that you haven't received that cash, right? So the debtors basically directly relate to the sale being done by the company. When the P&L, we have taken the sale, complete sale, which we did even to this particular customer who did not pay me cash of 20 rupees. So that 20 rupees is a non-cash component. So I should actually be reducing my sales to that extent. So 20 rupees is a non-cash. I did not receive it. So we need to reduce it, which means that in the cash flow statement, if there is any increase in the current assets or any other current asset, debtors or any other current assets, then I would need to take that as negative impact. That will have negative cash flow impact. The reason is that it indicates that we haven't received that much of cash component. So what you do, you follow this logic. The same formula that I've shown you here, you would continue to use it over here for the current assets. So this is something that you would use for current assets. But if I put it this way, that let us assume that we have a liability. So we were supposed to pay we were supposed to pay some 100 rupees to my creditors in the last year, and now I see that the creditor balance has increased to 120. Now, this 20 rupees of increase is an indication that I was supposed to pay something and I did not pay. So, my creditor balance has gone up. So, there is at least this 20 rupees component which has been captured in my P&L, but I haven't paid that cash. So, there would be some expense that I've taken in my P&L and I've deducted it to reduce my profit. But in reality, I haven't paid cash. So, it is non-cash expense. So the increase in current liabilities is a non-cash expense and must be added. So what happens is that in this case, when you take the delta, you don't have to put a minus. You straight away take it as a positive number because increase in current liabilities is a positive cash impact for us. So no need to put that minus. No need to put that minus sign because it's going to have a positive cash impact. Right? Okay, Arvind. So let me explain it again. So what it means is that look at creditors as your vendor. Say you are buying some raw material. So there is this raw material vendor from whom you are buying some raw materials for manufacturing cameras. So let us say in the P&L, if I show you, we've got a raw material cost of 421 in 2019. So what have I done with this 421? This line item that you see 421, it has been taken as an operating cost and I have deducted this to arrive at final net profit. So I have deducted the entire amount of 421. Now let us assume out of 421, I don't pay him 421, I pay him only 400. So where will this 21 rupees go? This $21 million rather in this case would actually remain unpaid at the end of this year. And that's going to increase your current liabilities in the creditors line, which means that your creditors go up when you do not pay particular component of cash. So it is a non-cash component, non-cash expense which is not being paid. So from a cash flow standpoint, I should not have deducted this $21 million of component. So I'm going to add it back. That is what I'm doing here. That if there is any increase in the creditor balance, then you take it as a positive number and add it back in your cash flow statement. So this is basically the fact that I'm going to use over here to be able to write all of these items. So what is this account payable? Account payable is basically current liability, accrued liability is current liability, accounts receivable is current assets, inventory is current assets, and this is current assets. And if you go back to the balance sheet, you have all of these line items in the same sequence, right? You've got accounts payable, accrued liability, deferred remaining. You've got all of that out here in this sequence. So current liability, as I showed you, look at the second one. I'm going to take the current year number, which is 2017, 126 minus 2016. Take that delta, copy and paste it down because we've got accounts payable, liabilities, and revenue in the same sequence. I'm going to paste it down for all of these cells and then drag it on the right hand side as well. Right? So what we're doing, we're taking the current year number minus previous year number without taking a minus in front of it. We're taking it as is. We're not taking any minus sign. But when it comes to the accounts receivable, equal to minus of the current year number minus previous year number. We're going to take 2017 accounts receivable as 123, 80 in the last year. So that increase of 43 approximately is, or 42, 43 is approximately the component which I have not received in this particular year from my customers. So I'm going to put that here and drag it on the right hand side and for all other components as well. Right? So this is how the other items would look like. So you have the net changes in the working capital computed from current assets and current liabilities. That completes the cash flow from operating activities because now you have all the components in this sheet to be able to see what is the net cash flow from operating activities. You have three items here, and you've got one item here in row number 60. That formally completes the cash flow statement.